So my friends, it's just returned and it's episode 44 and this one's called Retaliation. You remember that there'd been quite a party in the village, but Gus and Belinda along with Stephen and Christine are about to leave. There's a bit of a difficulty for Bell, a major difficulty really. William Hazlitt, an English essayist who died in 1830, he said this: "I like a friend the better for having faults that one can talk about." But Belle had the problem that she got a friend with a very serious fault that she couldn't talk about, or could she? However, we'll leave them with the situation that they're leaving. Next morning, not too early, the guests make a preparation to leave. Yukta and Rukno took Belle and Gus to their aging father, and he took hold of Gus's arm, stared into his eyes and spoke some words of wisdom or prayer and smiled. It was a serene and solemn smile that only the elderly are able to give. Gus tried to smile back but had an uneasy feeling before this wise man. Belle sat before him and gazed straight into the old man's eyes. He called to Taliki and she fetched a beaded necklace, mostly brown polished wooden beads but spaced evenly. Among them were smaller bright red beads. He spoke a few words in a gentle voice, almost childlike. Then he took Belle's arms and Gus and gazing right through them, started to chant. Then he let go of their arms, nodded his head and looked rather sad. Taliki took Belle outside and found Zakti, her sister. She pointed to Zakti and said, "Ninka." Belle understood that word. Then she pointed at the beads and then at Belle and herself, and she said again, "Nekna." Belle understood. They had been adopted by the tribe, and Taliki and Belle were now Nenka sisters. Belle hugged Taliki and they both cried. All too soon the party were back in the canoes and being paddled the way they'd come, but not to the other tributary, but on down the river towards the other village, the one that they'd stopped that was a little nearer Malice. Belle watched Taliki and Ligla until they were out of sight, and again she vowed that she would return, but not as a refugee but as a sister, and with the desire to help these beautiful people hold on to their way of life. As they got to the last quarter of the journey to the next village, they could hear that hum of distant saws, and Belle saw one of the mighty trees of Amazonia towering over others, falling with a sickening splintering crash. It was quite a way into the forest, but the sound carried. The Indians, not familiar with it at all, took not much notice, but Carla spat in the water and Hermes said he would not translate what he said to the ladies. As they rounded a slight bend in the water, they saw a riverbank laden with very large tree trunks right on the edge of the water. There was nobody about, but there must have been 80 trees felled and then brought here. Carla explained, and Hermes translated, the great logs would be floated and pulled on down the river to Manus, where the wood could be processed and then exported to whoever the price was good for, whoever would pay the good price for. Not legally stressed, not moral. And then pausing for effect, Carla spat again into the water. He would have cause yet to do more than spit. 30 minutes later they all arrived at the village, or rather at what had been the village, but what they found was devastation everywhere. The houses were burned, there were bodies, men killed, and their few belongings were smashed, scattered, destroyed. In the forest they heard the weeping of a few women, 2 old men and some of the children. There were just 11 survivors. Among the slain men, riddled with bullets, were the men who had kindly canoed Christine, Stephen, Carla and Hermes up the river to Yukta's village. The Indians from the party were stunned. Belle understood they probably never even heard of such treatment of others, let alone come upon it. They gathered together the few survivors, and Belle could understand that they were going to take them to their village. Stephen, with sign language, persuaded them to do it quickly, to get them away safely. Carla and Hermes in the meantime checked the boat. It was untouched. Either they had not noticed it, or they were worried when they came onto a motorboat, and cowardly as they were, they left it alone. Stephen spoke to the elderly Indians. He pointed at the bodies and held his open palms out. The elderly Indian looked sadly at him and held up his arms straight from the elbow like a tree, the palm making the branches. Then he used the other hand to make movements like a sword just above the base of the tree. Then he made a noise, a very good imitation of a power saw, and then his arm fall like a felled tree. The woman with anxious faces pointed through the forest in the direction. As soon as all the natives had left, the party of 6 boarded Carla's boat. He was purple with rage, and he told Hermes to tell the others that he wasn't leaving until he'd struck a blow for the Indians. Hermes, in translation, looked quite alarmed. Stephen and Gus exchanged glances. Stephen said, "Well, Gus, are you up for it? Balancing the scales of justice?" Gus nodded, "Yes. The Indians helped us. They do not deserve this. I will help." Stephen looked at Christine. "Don't even think about telling Ben and I to play the helpless woman's role and stay here. We've both been toughened up in Belfast." Stephen nodded. "Hermes, why are you concerned? Is it right for us to take the law into our own hands?" "Well, what are you going to do? Go to the police? We're way up the river along a tributary, and these people have had no protection and aren't likely to get any." Hermes nodded, and Carla gave Stephen a hard grin as Hermes translated Stephen's words. "First," said Gus, "we need to spy on their camp." Seeing the sense of this, they moved the boat a little up the river toward the logs on the riverbank. The next morning, Ben and Stephen would go off innocently up the track and spy out the camp. Ben and Gus had trouble sleeping that night, but it was probably the number of cups of real coffee Carla had given them that caused it. Belle was upset by the scene in the village, but was in no mood to float away and ignore it. Stephen was also awake. He could turn a blind eye to the youthful foolishness of his students at times, but not this. When humans were hunted down like dogs because someone wanted to get rich by taking their forest from them, Stephen was confident that it would not go unnoticed. The fact that these very people would help them gave it all a very personal touch to him as well. Next morning, Ben and Stephen followed the track from the logs into the forest. The noise of the saws could be heard, and at one point they had to hide while a large trailer hauling a log of massive dimensions passed by. It took an hour to reach the loggers' camp. There was a large wooden hut and some smaller ones. The large one was at about 100 yards from the others. One man, a large man with a dirty apron, went to one hut and came out with a box of eggs. That must be a food store, they said. The door of another was open and Stephen could see some tools in it. The generator was in between these two huts. Further away was another hut, and Stephen thought the Portuguese notice said no naked flames, so probably it was a fuel store. Belinda noticed another hut further into the bushes, and they guessed it was maybe sleeping quarters. There were no fences. It looked as if security was light, and at night a nighttime raid would be easy. Belle drew a plan in her notebook, and they returned to the river in the boat. They sat in the gallery downriver a little and discussed their plans for the night. They all agreed that they would try not to physically hurt the loggers. They would concentrate on destruction of equipment and support systems. They tried to rest a bit, but more than anything else they ate and chatted. Carla wisely did not open any alcohol. He put 3 bottles of wine on the table, and Hermes interpreted his expression to celebrate after our blow for the Indians. Belle sat at the back of the boat and looked upriver toward her sister Taliki's home. "Nenka, Taliki," she said, "I promise you I will do what I can tonight, and I will be back." After night they set off. Carla carried a large pair of bolt croppers and a very big grin. Stephen and the others all had Belle's map of the camp in their heads. They walked up the track. The half moon could be seen flickering through the branches. They came upon the tractor and first deflated and then slashed the tyres. Hermes found the fuel tank and lifted handfuls of leaf mould and soil into it. Gus busied himself pulling out leads and pipes wherever he could around the engine, and anything that could be pulled, get out or cut off, he found it. Ben and Christine busied themselves as quietly as possible smashing lights and mirrors. "I think," said Stephen, "they may find the tractor needs a kind of a service before they start work tomorrow." Soon they were by the camp. The generator sounded loud as they neared it, but much noise and voices came from the large canteen. It was obviously the place where they drank, some kind of social club for the raiders of the forest. Gus and Carla would go first and burst open any doors they could. There was no sign of security at all, not even a dog. Hermes said they feel invincible because they've guns and a mechanism among our less developed people. Stephen nodded. "Yes, those loggers have security against bows and arrows, but we'll just use our brains." Gus and Carla soon had the food store door open and the fuel store. Pretty quickly, Belle and her mother were carrying cans of diesel into the food store. They opened everything they could and smashed food all over the floor. As soon as the radio hut was open, Stephen and Hermes removed the radio and poured diesel over it. Gus used the bolt croppers to destroy the area, and Carla moved on to a water container of probably 5,000 litres. He just turned the tap on. It was so easy. Soon the water was running out as the raiders turned the luck of the loggers into negation. The raiders joined up at the generator, but Stephen had a can of petrol in each hand. There was more fuel in the fuel store. They hastily agreed on a plan. They would all move to safety except Carla and Stephen. Stephen would pour petrol all over the food hut and the fuel hut, then pour a trail back to a safe spot. When Stephen gave a signal, Carla would stop the generator and then run. Stephen would set a match to his paper trail and they would both head for the track in a hurry. A man came out of the large hut and Stephen held his breath. Carla fingered the knife he carried, but the man staggered back toward the sleeping cabin. Once he'd gone inside, Stephen poured petrol everywhere, being careful that none was on himself. The very messy food store made him laugh. "Those bad girls," he said, as he added petroleum to the soup mix that they'd made on the floor. Then he poured another can past Carla and the generator, and yet another around the fuel depot. He lifted another can and poured it out along the direction of the track. He raised his hand and Carla ripped out wires on the generator. All was in darkness. Carla joined Stephen. He ignited Stephen's lighter, lit the petrol, filled the rag, held it up and standing back threw it to the paper trail. Suddenly the whole area was a blazing inferno, and there was, as Stephen and Carla ran, several explosions. From a distance, Belle and Christine, Hermes and Gus could not believe how much destruction they'd caused. As Stephen and Carla reached them, voices and torches appeared, but it was chaos. A gun was fired, the bullets were not anywhere near them. The men tried in vain to fight the fire. Another explosion ripped the generator apart, and the retaliation was complete. The loggers did not even make a chase. Cowards that they were, they lay low until the morning light revealed how extensive the damage to their equipment actually was. They would find there was even worse, because when they headed down the track, they found not only had the raiders destroyed their tractor, but their boat was off the shore, untied and half sunk in the river. A few kilometres up the river, Hermes, Carla, Stephen, Christine, Gus and Belinda drained the last of the wine. As dawn broke, Hermes and the rest had certainly decided that it was good to have all this information and to keep it to themselves, but nonetheless they had a good story that they would tell one day. "Well, Stephen," Belinda laughed, "that was some firework display. My dad would have been proud of you." So, that was a different story, wasn't it? We can understand, can't we, how feelings would be when they went back to the village and found their friends who'd helped them in that situation. Sad is the world, isn't it? But there is still more to come. They have to get home yet. Next episode to follow soon. Thank you, my friends. Bye-bye for now.